You ever have one of those days where you think it's going to be quiet, maybe even boring, and then boom, pure chaos breaks loose? That's exactly what happened when the HOA president decided my backyard was her personal shortcut. Yeah, you heard that right. She'd been cutting through my property like it was some public park path, acting like she owned the place. I let it slide a couple of times, thinking maybe it was a one-off thing. But nope, this woman had made it a routine. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not the type to go looking for trouble, but I've got boundaries for a reason. I live out on a piece of land that's meant to be peaceful, private, and most importantly, protected, especially when you've got a bull like mine who doesn't exactly roll out the welcome mat for strangers. His name's Maverick, and let's just say he's not the most patient guy when it comes to uninvited guests. So I finally had enough. I put up a simple gate, nothing fancy, just something to say, "Hey, don't come through here," seemed reasonable, right? Not to her. The moment she saw that gate, she completely lost it. We're talking full-on meltdown in the middle of my driveway. Red face, wild gestures, shouting about her rite of passage and how I was being hostile to the community. Meanwhile, Maverick was watching the whole scene from the pasture, pacing, snorting, ears twitching. I knew that look. He wasn't liking what he saw. And I had a bad feeling that if she took one more step in the wrong direction, things were going to get real interesting, real fast. But what she did next? I couldn't believe it. Let's just say, even Maverick was stunned. So there she was, standing just outside the new gate, arms crossed like she was about to call a town meeting. Right then and there. She kept going on about how this shortcut had been used for years, and that I was the first neighbor in a decade to cause problems. I told her politely again that this was private property, and that cutting across it wasn't just disrespectful, it was dangerous. She laughed. Like I was joking. Like Maverick, my 1,500-pound bull, was some lawn ornament. Now, let me back up a bit. I moved out here about a year ago. Bought this land for the peace, the space, and yeah, the freedom. I'd always wanted a bit of distance from busy neighborhoods and nosy neighbors. I knew the HOA came with some rules, but I never imagined they'd involve people strolling through my pasture like it was a walking trail. The former owner? He didn't say much, just that a few people like to cut through sometimes. He failed to mention that the president of the HOA treated it like her personal sidewalk. And the worst part? I tried to handle it respectfully. I talked to her first, even offered to help her find a different walking route. But no, she took it as some kind of personal attack, said I was disrupting community tradition and making things unnecessarily hostile. But how is setting boundaries hostile? Anyway, as she stood there ranting, Maverick edged closer to the fence. He's usually calm, but he's protective, especially when someone's yelling near his space. I called out, asked her nicely to step back. Instead, she took a bold step forward, right up to the fence line. That's when I saw it, the glint of something in her hand. I couldn't quite make it out at first, but whatever it was, it sure didn't look like a peace offering. I squinted, trying to get a better look at what she was holding. At first, I thought it was a phone. Maybe she was recording me or calling someone. But then I saw it clearly. It was a folded-up HOA notice. She'd marched across the street, through the neighborhood, just to hand-deliver a violation slip for putting up a gate on my own land. I couldn't believe it. She waved it around like it was some kind of badge, yelling about unauthorized changes to community pathways. Meanwhile, Maverick let out a low grunt that made her jump a little. I swear, the bull knew exactly what was going on. I took the paper calmly, trying not to escalate things. But inside, I was boiling. I looked at her and asked, "So you're telling me the HOA rules say I have to let people walk through my pasture?" She smirked and said, "You're part of this neighborhood now. You can't just do whatever you want." That's when I realized this wasn't just about a shortcut. this was about control. She'd gotten used to running things her way, and anyone who pushed back became the enemy. What she didn't know, though, was I'd already spoken with the county. My property line was clear. The pasture, all mine. There was no public easement, no right-of-way, no reason anyone should be stepping foot on my land without permission. But she didn't care about facts. She cared about power. And the more I stood my ground, the more determined she got to make life difficult. Later that day, a few of the neighbors started acting weird. One guy I used to wave to every morning suddenly wouldn't make eye contact. Another lady left a flyer in my mailbox about community unity and neighborly cooperation. I was starting to wonder just how deep this little shortcut issue really went. And then, that evening, I found tire tracks cutting through the edge of my field, fresh ones. Someone had been back there, but not on foot this time. I stood at the edge of my property, staring down at the tire marks, heart pounding. It hadn't rained in days, so the tracks were fresh, still sharp in the dirt. They didn't belong to any delivery truck or maintenance vehicle. These were car tires, smaller, and whoever it was had driven way too close to the fence line. Right where Maverick usually grazed, I followed the tracks a bit further and noticed they veered off behind the old shed near the back of the lot, a place no one had any reason to be. That's when it hit me. Someone wasn't just ignoring the new gate, they were testing me, pushing, to see how far they could go. That night I couldn't sleep. Every little noise outside made me sit up and check the window. I even walked out with a flashlight once just to be sure Maverick was okay. He was, but even he seemed restless. I knew the HOA president was behind all this somehow, but I couldn't prove it, not yet. I started to wonder if maybe I should have just let her keep walking across the field. But deep down, I knew that giving in now would only open the door to more problems later. The next morning, things escalated. I walked out to find the new gate wide open. Not just unlocked, swung open, with one of the hinges busted clean off. Maverick was still in the pasture, thankfully, but spooked. He was pacing and letting out sharp, warning snorts like he'd been messed with during the night. I checked the cameras I'd installed at the edge of the property. One of them was down, wires snapped like someone had yanked it right off the post. Then I got a knock at the door. Not a friendly knock, a hard, impatient one. I opened it to find the HOA president again, this time with a clipboard, a new notice, and a smug look like she'd just won something. But before I could even ask what she wanted, Maverick let out a deep bellow behind the house, louder than I'd ever heard him before. Something had pushed him too far. I didn't even get a word out before Maverick's bellow shook the air again. This time with that low, deep edge I'd only ever heard once before, when a coyote had gotten too close to the fence. The HOA president flinched, her eyes darting toward the sound, but she quickly covered it up with a fake smile and held out the clipboard. "Another violation," she said, almost cheerfully. "Unsecured livestock and aggressive animal behavior within community. Boundaries." I blinked at her, stunned. "You mean my bull on my property?" She shrugged like it was just paperwork. But something didn't add up. The busted gate, the tire tracks, the missing camera, and now this? It wasn't just about a shortcut anymore. This felt planned, coordinated. I asked her if she'd been near my pasture last night, and her face twitched just slightly before she denied it. Said she was home the whole evening and knew nothing about any damaged gate. But as she turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of mud caked on the heel of her shoes, mud that matched the soft dirt from the back of my lot. And right then, Maverick let out another snort, and I heard something crash near the shed, not a branch, something heavier. I told her to stay put and jogged around the house toward the pasture. As I got closer, Maverick was standing still, ears pinned, head lowered, eyes locked on something, or someone, on the other side of the fence near the shed. I slowed down and crept closer until I saw it. There was someone hiding behind the shed. Not a neighbor. not a landscaper. A man crouched low, in dark clothes. I couldn't see his face, but he was holding something in his hand, something that glinted just enough to catch the light. My heart raced. This wasn't just a dispute anymore. Someone had trespassed, damaged property, and now they were hiding out on my land. And the HOA president? She was still standing near the gate, watching, but not with surprise, with expectation. Like she knew he'd be there. I froze for a second, just long enough to process what I was seeing. This wasn't some teenager sneaking around or a lost hiker. This guy was dressed in black, like he was trying not to be seen. And whatever he was holding, it wasn't a tool or a phone. It looked like a pair of bolt cutters. That's when it all clicked. The gate, the camera, the tire tracks. This wasn't just trespassing. It was sabotage. I shouted out, and Maverick took that as his cue. He charged the fence with a thundering stomp that shook the ground. The man jumped up and ran, bolting across the back of the pasture like he'd suddenly remembered how to sprint. He didn't make it far, though. Maverick didn't need to touch him. Just being chased by a fully grown bull with horns was enough to make the guy trip and drow. I froze for a second, just long enough to process what I was seeing. This wasn't some teenager sneaking around or a lost hiker. This guy was dressed in black, like he was trying not to be seen. And whatever he was holding, it wasn't a tool. Or a phone. It looked like a pair of bolt cutters. That's when it all clicked. The gate, the camera, the tire tracks. This wasn't just trespassing. It was sabotage, I shouted out, and Maverick took that as his cue. He charged the fence with a thundering stomp that shook the ground. The man jumped up and ran, bolting across the back of the pasture like he'd suddenly remembered how to sprint. He didn't make it far, though. Maverick didn't need to touch him. Just being chased by a fully grown bull with horns was enough to make the guy trip and drop whatever he was carrying. He stumbled, scrambled back up, and vanished into the tree line behind my property. I ran up to the fence and looked down. The bolt cutters were real, and next to them, a plastic bag with a handful of broken gate hardware. Mine. He'd taken them after snapping the hinge clean off. I picked it all up, heart pounding, and walked back toward the front, where the HOA president was still waiting, but now her smug look had shifted into something tighter, like she'd just realized the situation had gotten away from her. I held up the evidence and said, "You wouldn't happen to know who he is, would you?" She didn't answer, just blinked, then turned and walked off without a word, leaving the clipboard behind on the ground. Later that day, I called the sheriff, filed a report, handed over everything. The footage from the working cameras, the bolt cutters, the bag of broken hardware. They took it seriously. Turns out, the man wasn't just a random guy. He was her nephew, recently fired from a job, and now conveniently volunteering with the HOA. But here's the twist. A week after everything blew up, I got a letter in the mail. Not from the HOA, from a law firm. Apparently, the HOA president had suddenly resigned, and she was now claiming I had endangered her life with a dangerous animal and mental distress. And just like that, the shortcut battle turned into something much bigger. I froze for a second, just long enough to process what I was seeing. This wasn't some teenager sneaking around or a lost hiker. This guy was dressed in black, like he was trying not to be seen. And whatever he was holding, it wasn't a tool or a phone. It looked like a pair of bolt cutters. That's when it all clicked. The gate, the camera, the tire tracks. This wasn't just trespassing. It was sabotage, I shouted out, and Maverick took that as his cue. He charged the fence with a thundering stomp that shook the ground. The man jumped up and ran, bolting across the back of the pasture like he'd suddenly remembered how to sprint. He didn't make it far, though. Maverick didn't need to touch him. Just being chased by a fully grown bull with horns was enough to make the guy trip and drop whatever he was carrying. He stumbled, scrambled back up, and vanished into